September 12, 1933, London, England. On this date, Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, recently arrived in Britain after fleeing Nazi Germany, conceived one of the most important ideas in modern science, the nuclear chain reaction. While crossing a London street, he realized that if a single atomic nucleus could release neutrons that split additional nuclei, the process could continue without end, releasing vast energy. Szilard had been following a public debate in which physicist Ernest Rutherford declared atomic energy impractical. Szilard disagreed, and immediately began thinking about materials that could sustain such a reaction. Within a year, he filed a patent in 1934 describing the concept of a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction, and a reactor capable of generating power. The British Admiralty classified the patent as secret, recognizing its potential military importance. Leo Szilard was born in Budapest in 1898. He studied mechanical engineering at the Budapest Technical University and later physics in Berlin, where he attended lectures by Albert Einstein and Max Planck. During the 1920s, he collaborated with Einstein on electromagnetic inventions and published influential papers on thermodynamics and information theory. After 1933, Nazi racial laws forced many Jewish scientists out of Germany. Szilard joined the growing community of exiled physicists in Britain, sharing their concern that German research could be redirected toward advanced weapons. By 1938, the discovery of nuclear fission by Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann confirmed that splitting uranium atoms released additional neutrons, precisely the mechanism Szilard had predicted 5 years earlier. He immediately recognized that this process could lead to a practical chain reaction, and, if uncontrolled, to an explosive device. In 1939, with the outbreak of war imminent, Szilard moved to the United States. There, he began working with Enrico Fermi at Columbia University to test the feasibility of a chain-reacting pile using uranium and graphite. At the same time, Szilard drafted a memorandum warning of the military implications of fission. To ensure that the U.S. government understood the risk of German progress, Szilard decided to involve Albert Einstein, whose reputation could attract political attention. Together, they would write a letter that urged the creation of an American atomic energy program, the document that would eventually reach President Franklin D. Roosevelt. After contacting Albert Einstein, Leo Szilard prepared a written statement summarizing his concerns. With help from fellow Hungarian physicists Eugene Wigner and Edward Teller, he drafted what became known as the Einstein-Szilard Letter. The document outlined the risk that Germany could use uranium to build a chain-reacting weapon capable of releasing immense energy. Szilard met Einstein at his home in Long Island, New York in late July 1939. Einstein listened carefully, signed the final draft, and authorized Szilard to deliver it. The letter reached President Franklin D. Roosevelt through Alexander Sachs, an economist with White House access. Roosevelt read the message in October 1939, a month after Germany invaded Poland. He responded by creating a uranium advisory committee to investigate the scientific claims. Although the committee's initial funding was small, the decision marked the first official step toward what later became the Manhattan Project. Szilard continued working with other émigré physicists to demonstrate that a self-sustaining reaction was possible. At Columbia University, he collaborated with Enrico Fermi, using uranium and graphite to test neutron behavior. Their experiments confirmed that natural uranium could support a chain reaction if impurities were removed. By 1941, the United States had entered the war, and scientific attention shifted from theory to weaponization. Szilard's research group relocated to the University of Chicago, where work began on designing a controlled reactor that could produce plutonium for military use. On December 2, 1942, inside a converted squash court beneath Stagg Field, the first controlled nuclear chain reaction took place. The structure, called Chicago Pile 1, was built from graphite blocks and uranium layers arranged to slow and multiply neutrons. The reaction reached criticality for 28 minutes before being shut down manually. Szilard understood immediately what this meant. The principle he had conceived in 1933 was now a physical reality. The experiment confirmed that both large-scale energy production and nuclear explosives were achievable. After the success at Chicago, Szilard's work was absorbed into the growing Manhattan Engineer District, directed by General Leslie Groves and J. Robert Oppenheimer. However, Szilard quickly became uneasy with the project's new direction. His interest had been in proving the science, not in creating a weapon designed for mass destruction. As military secrecy intensified, Szilard found himself increasingly isolated. His warnings about long-term political consequences were dismissed as obstruction. Yet he remained on the project through 1943, contributing to reactor design and safety calculations that ensured plutonium could be produced efficiently. By 1944, Szilard began privately arguing that the weapon should never be used against civilian targets. He believed that simply demonstrating its power on an uninhabited area could be enough to end the war. Those warnings would be ignored. By early 1945, Leo Szilard's position inside the Manhattan Project had shifted from scientist to dissenter. While his technical work was critical in the early design of plutonium reactors, his growing opposition to using the atomic bomb put him at odds with the project's military leadership. Szilard understood the scientific achievement, but he also understood the consequences. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the original justification for the bomb, preventing a Nazi nuclear victory, no longer existed. Yet the project continued, now directed entirely toward Japan. Szilard believed that this change transformed a defensive effort into an offensive one. At the Metallurgical Laboratory in Chicago, Szilard drafted a petition addressed to President Harry S. Truman. Signed by 70 scientists, the document urged that the atomic bomb not be used without first giving Japan a chance to surrender or after demonstrating the weapon on an uninhabited site. Szilard's reasoning was strategic, not emotional. He feared an arms race that would make future wars even more catastrophic. The petition was forwarded through official channels but never reached Truman before the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. When Szilard heard the news, he reportedly said, "We had lost our moral compass." He later wrote that his greatest regret was not doing more to stop it. After the war, Szilard was excluded from further atomic research due to security concerns. He redirected his attention toward political activism, warning that secrecy and competition would lead to nuclear proliferation. In 1946, he helped form the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, chaired by Einstein, to promote international control of nuclear energy. The group's campaigns were among the earliest calls for global disarmament. During these years, Szilard also began rethinking his career. Disillusioned by the military use of his ideas, he shifted toward biophysics, applying physical principles to living systems. At the University of Chicago, he investigated how cells reproduce and how information might be stored in biological molecules. His work would later influence early theories of molecular biology and genetic coding. In 1949, Szilard became one of the most outspoken critics of the proposed hydrogen bomb project, warning that its development would guarantee an uncontrollable nuclear arms race. His views placed him in direct opposition to figures such as Edward Teller, another Hungarian émigré who supported the new weapon. Despite growing political isolation, Szilard remained a key voice in public debates about nuclear ethics and scientific responsibility. He frequently reminded colleagues that science without moral restraint could lead to irreversible damage. As the 1950s began, Szilard left active physics research entirely, but his warnings continued to shape discussions about nuclear policy. The man who had initiated the atomic age was now spending his life trying to prevent it from destroying civilization. By the 1950s, Leo Szilard had left nuclear physics behind. He redirected his intellect toward biology, a field he believed offered a chance to understand life rather than destroy it. At the University of Chicago and later at the Salk Institute, he studied molecular genetics and cellular regulation. He proposed that biological systems could be understood through the same logical principles he once applied to nuclear reactions: measurable, reproducible, and governed by information flow. His approach would later influence early thinking in molecular biology and computer-based models of genetic control. Although he no longer worked on weapons or reactors, Szilard remained active in scientific diplomacy. He met regularly with colleagues to discuss arms control and sought direct contact with political leaders on both sides of the Cold War. In 1960, he arranged a private meeting with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev at the Soviet mission in New York. Szilard argued that a direct exchange of scientific ideas could prevent misunderstandings between the United States and the Soviet Union. Khrushchev agreed, and the conversation became one of the first informal steps toward the concept of scientist diplomacy, communication between nations through researchers rather than military channels. Szilard also pushed for public education about nuclear risks. He supported the Pugwash conferences on science and world affairs, founded in 1957, which brought scientists from rival nations together to discuss arms limitation. His advocacy helped shape the early framework for the nuclear test ban treaty negotiations that would follow in the 1960s. In his later years, Szilard was known for sharp wit and an unshakable sense of responsibility. He often described the events of 1933 to 1945 as a warning about what happens when discovery moves faster than judgment. To friends and colleagues, he represented a contradiction, the man who triggered the atomic era and then devoted his life to preventing its misuse. Diagnosed with cancer in 1960, Szilard applied his scientific curiosity to his own treatment, designing an experimental radiation schedule that extended his life by several years. He continued to write essays on political ethics and the future of scientific cooperation until his death on May 30, 1964, in La Jolla, California, at the age of 66. Leo Szilard left no monuments and claimed no military honors. His legacy was intellectual, a single idea that reshaped global power, and a lifelong reminder that science and conscience must evolve together. His story remains one of the clearest examples of how one person's insight can alter the direction of history.